And now, a passage from the history of the United States Post Office to the year 1829 from Chapter 4, The Early Days of the American Post Office, 1775 to 1789. The Continental Congress was on the threshold of a great struggle in May 1775. It was necessary that the best and speediest system of communication obtainable be put into operation to ensure the needed cooperation between the colonies. In this case, men turned naturally to the man who had been signally successful in the management of the posts for more than 10 years. Franklin served on the committee appointed on May 29th, which on July 26th brought in a plan for the establishment of a general post office. The resolve of Congress setting up the office is as follows: that a postmaster general be appointed for the United Colonies, who shall hold this office at Philadelphia and shall be allowed a salary of $1,000 per annum for himself and $340 per annum for a secretary and comptroller, with power to appoint such and so many deputies as to him may seem proper and necessary, that a line of posts be appointed under the direction of the Postmaster General from Falmouth in New England to Savannah in Georgia, with as many cross posts as he shall think fit. That the allowance to the deputies in lieu of salary and all contingent expenses shall be 20% on the sums they collect and pay into the post office annually, when the sum is under or not exceeding $1,000, and 10% for all sums above $1,000 a year. That the rates of postage shall be 20% less than those appointed by the Act of Parliament. That the several deputies account quarterly with the General Post Office and the Postmaster General annually to the Continental Treasurer, when he shall pay into the receipt of the said Treasurer the profits of the Post Office. And if the necessary expense of this establishment should exceed the produce of it, the deficiency shall be made good by the United Colonies, and paid to the Postmaster General by the Continental Congress. On the same day, Benjamin Franklin was unanimously elected Postmaster General for the term of 1 year, or until another should be appointed. The appointment of the Secretary and Comptroller was left in his hands. Goddard, who had promoted the constitutional post, was given his choice of becoming postmaster at either Baltimore or Norfolk, or of being surveyor to the post office, and chose the latter office. In this capacity he made a tour of several colonies, as we learn from the Virginia Gazette of Williamsburg for September 1st, 1775. We read that this day William Goddard, Esquire, surveyor to the Continental Post Office, arrived at this city on a tour of the several United Colonies to establish offices in the principal towns and other commercial places under the authority of Benjamin Franklin, Esquire, who was appointed Postmaster General by the Honorable Continental Congress. And as soon as the officers are commissioned and the routes fixed, the establishment will immediately take place. As comptroller, Franklin named Richard Bach, his son-in-law, and when Franklin went to France as agent of the colonies, Bach stepped into the vacant place of Postmaster General on November 7th, 1776. Viewed in the large, the problems before the office were but two in number. First, and of much the largest importance, was the problem of keeping a sure and speedy line of communication open between Congress and the armies in the field. The chief efforts of the department had to be directed toward meeting this need. After that, it must attend as best it could to the maintenance of as good a service as possible, to keep the various colonies in touch with one another, and to facilitate the small correspondence that continued in spite of the war. The first service to the army was often costly and sometimes hard to keep up, but in the main it was well performed. Of necessity, however, the other work of the post office suffered. During the war, many of the important towns, especially along the coast, were at one time or another in the possession of the British troops. The important mail routes were constantly interrupted, and the volume of correspondence was so shrunken that the office was continually struggling to find funds enough even to pay its riders. The first rates established had been the same as those under the British Post Office, but on September 30th, 1775, these were suspended on the ground that they would not yield a revenue sufficient to pay the riders. Nevertheless, the members of Congress were determined to enjoy all the privileges of officials under the old office, for on November 8th it was provided that all letters and packets sent by or addressed to the delegates should be free during the sessions of Congress. This privilege was soon extended to the generals in command of the armies and later to the privates in the ranks. It is typical of the man that Benjamin Franklin used to frank his letters with the signature, "Be Free Franklin." We find record in the papers of the Continental Congress of constant attempts to render more safe and sure the communication with the armies. In December 1775, an express service for public despatches only was provided from Cambridge to Philadelphia by way of Hartford, Dobbs Ferry, and New Brunswick. The riders were to travel day and night and receive pay at the rate of 12 pennies per mile, Pennsylvania currency, in winter, or 8 pennies per mile in summer. In order to remove all possible causes of interruption of service, postmasters and post riders were exempted from all military duties. The next year, 1776, another resolve sought to improve the service still more by providing the employment of one rider for each 25 or 30 miles, with regular service 3 times a week. State assemblies were urged to cooperate with the General Post Office in regulating routes and service within their territories. 3 advice boats were provided for, one from each of the 3 most southerly colonies, to carry dispatches to Congress. They were to be armed and have good speed. In addition to the mails, they were to carry such freight as they might without delaying their journeys, since this would help to meet the expenses of the service. Late in the year 1776, Bok succeeded Franklin as Postmaster General, and Goddard, the surveyor, quit the service. It was said that he was disgruntled because he was not appointed comptroller in Bok's place when the latter was promoted. However, his work in the important position he held had not been very commendable. Bok wrote of him that whilst in office, he did business in a very careless and slovenly manner. One of his exploits will serve to illustrate this. In the winter of 1776, he had been sent by Bok to fix the posts between Philadelphia and the armies. Meeting Washington in retreat across New Jersey, he at once returned to Philadelphia without having perfected any arrangements at all. It was this which precipitated his resignation. Ebenezer Hazard, who had been postmaster at New York and had followed the army to Fishkill, was Goddard's successor, and he brought much energy to the task. In January 1777, Bok told Congress that Hazard had gone to the eastward to try to establish posts. The British troops were then in possession of most of the post roads, and the only communication with the north was by way of the back parts of New Jersey. In February 1777, a further attempt was made to improve the post office. Congress divided the service into 2 districts and appointed a surveyor for each. The northern district of the Grand Line of Posts was to extend from Philadelphia by way of Easton, Fishkill, Hartford, Boston, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to Falmouth on Casco Bay. The southern district included the road through Annapolis, Williamsburg, Halifax, North Carolina, Wilmington, and Charleston to Savannah. It was intended to establish a service twice a week over the full length of this line. For this purpose, $5,000 was voted to the Postmaster General. The salary of the surveyors was fixed at $500 a year, with $200 allowed for traveling expenses in the northern and $300 in the southern district. It was hoped that by this means regular mails could be secured and that regular speed could be made, for the riders were ordered to make at least 100 miles in 24 hours, traveling day and night. In reality, the service fell far short of these expectations. In 1776, a letter from General Charles Lee from Virginia complained that the post was very irregular, and that it took a letter 6 or 7 weeks to come from Philadelphia. In the same year, a letter to John Hancock, President of the Continental Congress, said that the posts were very irregular and answered no purpose of intelligence from the army, nor a quick communication between the several states and with Congress, which in times like the present are highly necessary, and to effect which was the reason of that regulation. It is of great importance that this business should be put on such a footing as to answer effectually the end intended. Thomas Jefferson was very exacting in his expectations regarding postal service. In May 1777, he wrote to John Adams complaining of the irregularity of the post. Adams replied in defense of the office, saying, "A committee on the post office have found 1,000 difficulties. The post is now extremely regular from north to south, though it comes but once a week. It is very difficult to get faithful riders to go oftener, and the expense is very high, and the profits so dear is everything, and so little correspondence is carried on except in franked letters, will not support the office. Mr. Hazard is now gone southward in the character of surveyor of the post office, and I hope will have as good success as he had eastward, where he put the office in very good shape." While the post office was thus haltingly trying to serve the needs of the country, its financial condition was rapidly passing from bad to worse. Nor does it seem reasonable to blame any of the high officials for this poor showing. Bach was filling his post acceptably, and Hazard was certainly active enough as surveyor, but the institution lacked all those conditions which make for large revenues. Peace and security, easy communication, and flourishing commerce alone can make a postal system self-supporting, and the Continental Post Office had none of these favoring circumstances. As to rates, some fault may be found with the policy pursued, but the receipts of the office were not much affected by the increased rates until the later years of the war. Here at High Americana, I am bringing you the most unique, eclectic, and even patriotic content that you aren't going to find anywhere else. So if you enjoy this type of content, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. The link is in the description. The goal is to make this a full-time job. Thank you very much.